So bottom line, Total Drama's All-Star season is nothing but utter rubbish in every facet. Poor writing, very soaring boot order, and quite frankly, the biggest dip in the Total Drama quality. Now, with that said, the cast overall, I feel it was at least the best that we could somewhat get, despite the fact that it's such a small amount, plus with some very questionable casting choices that don't really prove their worth on the season. Makes me interested in the idea of basically doing a recasting of this season. Let's see what we got. What's up, everybody? This is Willie, and today I'm back talking about Total Drama, and we're here with another casting video, and to be specific, a recasting style video. Where in this video alone, I thought it'd be a cool idea to run through the actual cast of Total Drama All-Stars and determine which cast member stays on the initial cast or gets replaced by someone else. Now, just briefly talking about the original cast alone, it was probably at least the most competent we can get. While there are some questionable picks, I'm sure it's pretty self-explanatory who they are. I just felt like this cast was definitely neatly put together, which was a shame how the story of the season pretty much tarnished its quality out of a competent cast that we got. So likewise here, I'll be running through each cast member through the actual season's boot order and eliciting whether or not I believe they should stay on the cast or be replaced by someone else much worthwhile their spot. So that's enough said. Let's dive right into this recasting process. Starting everything off with Lindsay, I will admit, at times I kind of forget that she was even on this season. Now, the pick as a whole, it's decent. She is definitely amongst an audience favorite. However, I begrudgingly decided to take her off. Like, nothing against her. I do really like Lindsay. However, I just felt like she didn't really have much of a story coming into the season where, while you may question what kind of growth Lindsay had, it just felt like at points she was just hit or miss. And it leaves you out to debate, like, do we really need that on All-Stars, especially if she's just gonna be the same as she is? Like, this all just tells me that I think the most ideal move is replacing her with someone else more valuable. So she's off the cast. Now it comes down to who is she replaced with. Now looking at the first generation, from the female side of things, there are at least a couple definitive picks. But genuinely speaking, I think you've gotta have Lashana on the cast. Like yes, her character does slightly peter out, especially in her appearances. She without a doubt brings such good TV and drama on the cast, especially with her very wonky relationships with the likes of like Heather in particular, and that might be the needed crescendo to elevate the dynamics or with this cast. So in all this essence, Lashana easily is a solid replacement pick. Next on the list, we have Lightning, and I chose to keep him on. Why? Well, he was a finalist in the last season, so that gives merit to his spot on this cast, as well as that he does have at least have some level of a storyline to prove himself, especially with circumstances relating to his personal life. So through all those means, I think it was ideal to keep Lightning on this cast. Then we get to Jo, and another one that I chose to keep on the cast because she, one, is warranted the spot on an All-Star season, plus is very super fit in challenges and anchors that competitive mold, which is surely needed in a competition show. Plus also, she does have some very interesting relationships with someone like Lightning where they are pretty up and down. And then with another individual who I'll be talking about soon. Like, it's no doubt that Jo is suited for the All-Star mold, so I'm not leaving her off. And then we finally move on to Sam, and I think everyone is expecting this. I obviously would cut him. Like, I don't even get what the point of him being on the All-Star cast. Like, if you're gonna cast him, at least bring him with Dakota, since Total Drama is known to really shoehorn with these romances and whatnot. And with Sam just being casted alone, just made his role on the season less interesting, which does get worse as the season plays out. So thank God for this recasting. We can now think of his existence as a white crayon. Anyways, now it comes down to who are we gonna replace him with? Well, just looking at the field from the second generation, and especially for the male side, for all of it, the options were pretty narrow. So the definitive best choice to replace Sam with is a player who at least made a place farther than him, and that will be Brick. I think he would be a much more of an inspired choice than some flatline like Sam, where Brick plays off as much more of the tropes of a heroic style character with such strong morals that he's so ambitious of. And plus also, it adds to a little interesting dynamic with him and Jo, even though I'll admit they would not even be on the same starting tribe as Brick would be a clear hero. But who knows, the season would probably play out differently and whatnot, but either way, I think Brick would be a much better choice, who would bring a lot more to the table from both a character and gameplay standpoint, more than some rando that I decided to replace, so this is my pick. Then we get to Header next, and seriously, I would not bail you out of prison if you would not have Header on an all-star cast. Like, you literally cannot do that. Obviously, with that said, Header is clearly staying on. Again, massive villain since her first season, had a very unique character growth in World Tour, and still has an interesting story where she goes from there, and plus also with another individual on the cast, who I'm about to talk about, that'll sustain a unique sort of interaction and dynamic for the season as well. So with that said, Header was a clear lock to stay on this cast. Then we get Sierra, and unlike Header, she is not a lock. Like for me, Sierra was just a whatever choice coming into this season, and after how everything played out, I'm definitely not content to see her ever again. Like, she really had no growth, and honestly, it's a shame because it felt like she was really coming to her own by the end of World Tour, but with this season, it pretty much threw all that out the window. So in a way, for this recasting, it's a way that could save her character growth if reality was changed. So sorry Sierra, flush a shame, you go. So now it comes to who the replacement was. We're back to picking someone from the first generation, and on top of that, I am going to shift gears a bit with this, where I'm actually selecting a replacing male in this slot, which I'll expand on that more when it comes to my next replacement pick. But anyways, narrowing down to contenders, I did almost pick Owen because Total Drama just loves milking every sort of stereotype humor he has, but in the context that he would appear on the Redonkulous race later on, I think it's best to leave him off. So in this spot, may not be a very ideal pick, but I just feel like this person, one, fits the hero mold perfectly, but also has a very interesting status throughout his TD career, and that player is DJ. We're obviously to emphasize, he never really formally gets voted out in any of his seasons, which is a very wild stat, and I think that really offers up something intriguing for an all-star return, as DJ1 is a very likable figure, so it feels like he is equipped to really make a deep run. So with that, I think DJ is a feasible choice to replace Sierra on this casting. Then we got Duncan, and come on, he was a lock. Like, okay, Duncan on his own right, I will admit, doesn't really have that interesting of a storyline. And this casting here mostly stems from his relationship and dynamic with a couple of other individuals who I think everyone knows of. But either way, even without a storyline, yeah, he still has other facets that warrant him the all-star spot. I mean, come on, a very complex villainous figure from the first generation, someone who was a finalist in one of the seasons, plus is also in a romantic relationship because it's the sort of material that Total Drama will always take the advantage of. So through that means, I'm okay with leaving Duncan in on the cast. Then we get to Cameron, and as much as he has a great story in his initial season, I think this may not be popular, but I'm going to take Cameron off the cast. While, I mean, as an all-star, he is definitely warranted the spot. I just feel like his story was much more complete in Revenge of the Island, and seeing how all-star played out with his character kind of regressing, I just feel like, you know what, it's better off not to have him here for the sake of it. So now, who would be the ideal replacement for him? Well, taking back to what I mentioned earlier with the Sierra recasting, I opted to switch the gender choice, in this case being a female this time, because it's mainly perpetuated by the circumstances of most of the replacement choices not being the most soon in the world for an all-star season. Plus also, I mean, truthfully, I wanted to at least create a bit more balance with the gender breakdown in terms of the generation they represent. So through that means, I shall choose a female replacement for Cameron, and in most given worlds, I do think that it was so hit or miss that this character in particular was supposed to be on the actual season, but then was cut out of the final roster last second, and that player is Anne Maria. Like, for me, is she better than Cameron as a player? I think not, but from a more personality lens and a story coming into this season, I think it's way more valuable. She is a very entertaining presence, often very confrontational too, and does have this very perplexing relationship with one of Mike's alternative personalities, and that alone can stir up a bit more of the drama that is needed for a season like this. Plus also, coming out of Revenge of the Island, where she unintentionally got herself out of the game due to a misunderstanding, it feels like this all-star spot is also an opportunity to really redeem herself, because she never really formally got herself voted out, so that status right there already gives her a slight leg up for this casting spot. Next up, Alejandro, and what do you think? Like, Mr. Obvious Villain should not be shafted his spot on an all-star cast, so to thread the needle here, he's obviously on, and to add to that, he has this rivalry slash frenemy relationship with Header, so that's beneficial to him, and obviously the product that TD is going to milk out of. Plus, I had already just said it, a villain that plays the game in a very unique unique way with pretty much effectively using his own charm to get players to do things that are completely against their best interest. And he's pretty cerebral too. And with how the season played out with him being at least one of the couple to suss out Mal, I think it homes into his role as a source of conflict to Mal's story. So by that means, there's no way you could leave him off the cast. Next up, Courtney. And let's be real, she obviously would make the cut. I mean, such a significant character, had a huge spike in season 2, and quite frankly has an interesting note leaving off of season 3 due to a complex relationship she has with obviously Duncan and then another player who I'm about to talk about that does offer up a compelling storyline she has coming into this season. So while the inevitability there for her character to slightly regress, I still think it's just every other aspect with her story coming into it, as well as her significantly elegant gameplay status that makes her warranted the spot on All-Stars that you just cannot overshadow. And then the person that I was just talking about, Gwen, and come on, she's going to be making the cut even though I personally wouldn't want it, but from the standards of total drama in terms of bringing people back, they obviously want to give highlight to the romance, and during the time she had a relationship with Duncan, so there's the merit to that. And then the obvious complex relationship that she currently has with Courtney. And yes, I get that most fans are not a particular fan of this love triangle, but ultimately I think it's worth at least giving it another season to really test the waters on how it's gonna find its resolution, which we saw how it plays out. And while not in the most ideal world, it's still worth putting all this to end. And with Gwen pertaining to that, it was an easy choice to keep her on. Then we get to Scott, and like Heather, it would be a travesty not to have him on an All-Star season. Like again, massive villain on Revenge of the Island, definitely has something interesting on a return to see how he plays the game this time, and within the context of the season, knowing that he would get in a pretty close relationship with Courtney, I think it's fair enough to make his spot worthwhile. And then finishing things off, we have Mike and Zoe, and I won't even bother talking about them individually since they are an obvious pair in a relationship, and Total Drama just loves making such material out of it, so clear cut, they are staying on the cast, which I know a lot of you might not be happy, especially with what happens with Mike, but I mean, come on, with how you know Total Drama's desires, they obviously need to make such an immense highlight to these romantic connections, which is likely highly the case why they were even brought back originally to begin with. So there we go, that's my recasting for the season, which should I even call that since I really only switched out 4 of the 14 actual players on the season, but who cares? In my opinion, these are probably the more better picks than most of the ones who I replaced them with. Likewise, it is my opinion, and this is basically how I would interpret a much more adequate cast. And if you've been paying attention to some of the tribe details, you may notice that all the replacement members are all in the heroic hamsters, which is insane how pretty much the heroic side of the original cast was definitely a lot more of a fumble than the villain choices. So yeah, I just wanted to point out that intriguing fact. But that pretty much is my recasting for the Total Drama All-Stars. Let me know what you guys think, and like the usual, tap like and subscribe to avoid missing out on any future content from me. With that said, I'm going to sign off here. Thanks for tuning in.